Pixis shuddered in terror as Edward's vessel descended through Earth's toxic clouds toward the ruined cityscape below, wondering if this filthy, war-ravaged planet would shatter her sanity before shattering her misguided notions about humans. The gleaming crystalline towers of Ventax Prime, powered by zero-point energy and built for aesthetic harmony, stood in stark contrast to the crumbling skyscrapers pockmarked with battle scars that Edward now guided her through. Pixis had looked down on humans as uncouth primitives, little better than wild animals. Her people had shunned the barbarians from Earth for centuries, only grudgingly allowing this diplomatic visit out of desperation, as an existential threat loomed on the horizon. The relentless Zorgarth Empire was sweeping across the galaxy, consuming world after world, threatening to exterminate or assimilate all in their path. Rumors swirled that the humans, for all their faults, had developed advanced weapons and shield systems that could turn the tide, born of necessity from their endless warring amongst themselves. Still, the Ventaxian High Council remained distrustful, seeing humans as little more than primitive, violent upstarts useful only as cannon fodder. Everything changed when Edward saved Pixis's life. In one fateful moment, he demonstrated the nobility, self-sacrifice, and ingenuity that humans were truly capable of. When Ventaxian fanatics unleashed a deadly bioweapon in the capital city square, Edward charged into the chaos, using his armor's systems to aerosolize an antidote of his own design. He carried Pixis to safety, even as she convulsed from exposure, saving her and hundreds of others. This heroic act swayed public opinion and prompted the High Council to open formal relations with the Human Alliance. They ordered a still-recovering Pixis to accompany Edward back to Earth to learn more about his people and coordinate strategies to repel the Zorgarths. Edward knew this would be his most challenging mission yet. Though humans had achieved wonders, their flaws and vices festered just beneath the surface, ready to shock even this haughty alien. As their ship settled onto the cracked landing pad with a jolt, Edward turned to Pixis with a roguish grin. "Welcome to Earth. Try not to judge us too harshly." He popped the hatch and a wave of smog, a cacophony of noise, and dazzling neon lights rushed in to assault Pixis's senses. Her head spun as she stumbled out into the grimy, chaotic, vibrant sprawl. This would be a baptism by fire. The sleek UN tower loomed over the cracked and littered streets, a beacon of glass and steel amidst the urban decay. Edward hauled Pixis out of the mud-splattered transport, her smooth blue skin and ornate gold jumpsuit incongruous against the grime. Protesters screamed and hurled refuse beyond the security barricades, hurling epithets at the alien whore and her race traitor companion. Inside the Grand Assembly Hall, Edward took the podium. Grim-faced world leaders stared him down. He flashed classified after-action reports onto giant holoscreens, showcasing the horrific devastation of colony worlds that had fallen to the Zorgarth. Charred corpses in the streets, shattered domes exposing helpless civilians to the airless void. "This is the enemy we face," Edward declared. "They will not stop until every last one of us is dead or enslaved. Our only hope is to stand together, combining Ventaxian zero-point energy and inertial dampening with our octanium warheads and neutronium armor. Divided we fall." Angry murmurs erupted. The Russian president banged his hand. "How do we know Ventaxians won't stab us in back? That they don't want our weapons for themselves?" The Chinese premier stood. "Let them fight their own battles. We must look after our own people, not waste lives on foreigners." An aide burst in and whispered to the Secretary General, who blanched. "I've just received word. The Zorgarth have launched a full-scale invasion of the Ventax system. Ventax Prime is under heavy bombardment. Their High Council begs for immediate aid, or their world may fall within days." Pixis shoved Edward aside and gripped the podium, eyes blazing. "I come before you now in humanity's darkest hour to beg for your help. For generations, Ventaxians dismissed you as primitive warmongers, unworthy to join our enlightened republic among the stars. Now, I see the error of our ways." She waved at Edward. "This man saved my life through bravery and ingenuity. His noble spirit opened my eyes to humanity's true potential, to your resilience, your adaptability, your courage in the face of overwhelming odds. The same qualities that let you claw your way up from the caves to build wonders. The same qualities that will let us, triumph over the Zorgarth. Leaders glanced at each other uncertainly. Pixis pressed on. Your artificial differences pale next to what unites you. To the threat we all face. The Zorgarth will not stop at Ventax Prime. They will come for Earth next. Only together can we prevail. She fell to her knees, crystalline tears streaking down her face. A long silence followed. Then the Secretary General stood. All in favor of a joint strike mission to relieve Ventax Prime? One by one, the ayes sounded out. The resolution passed. Unanimous. As Earth's combined war fleet mustered and made for the nearest jump point, Edward found Pixis in the observation lounge, staring out at the blue marble of her adopted home. He squeezed her shoulder. I'm proud of you. Of us. When the Zorgarth see us, they'll know our true strength. She took his hand, managing a smile. I must return ahead and help coordinate the defenses, but I know you'll be right behind. Edward nodded, suddenly choked up. Humanity won't let you down. When the shit hits the fan, that's when we rise. I'll see you on the front lines. Their eyes met, a bond forged through fire. Then she was gone in a cascade of light. Edward turned to watch drop ships loaded with space marines thunder up from Nellis and the Baikonur to rendezvous with the battle fleet in orbit. The first joint operation was underway. The war to decide the fate of two peoples had begun. The human strike force burst out of hyperspace above Ventax Prime, Edward's flagship leading the charge. Through the view screen, he saw the planet's once pristine atmosphere marred by the fires of war. Zorgarth dreadnoughts loomed over the battered Ventaxian defense fleet. All ships, form up, Edward barked into the comms. Rendezvous with Ventaxian command. Let's show these Zorgarth bastards what humanity can do. As their ships docked with the Ventaxian command station, Edward strode onto the bridge. Ventaxian officers eyed the humans warily. Admiral Zix, a stern-faced Ventaxian, stepped forward. We appreciate your assistance, but this is our world. We'll handle tactics, Zix said. Edward bit back a retort. With all due respect, Admiral, we're here to help. Let's pool our strengths. Over the next hours, heated debates erupted as human and Ventaxian commanders clashed over strategy. Edward's unorthodox ideas met resistance until a Zorgarth assault nearly breached their defenses. In the chaos, Edward took charge, coordinating a brilliant counterattack that drove the enemy back. Zix regarded Edward with newfound respect. Perhaps there is wisdom in your human approach. What do you propose? Edward outlined his plan to lure the Zorgarth capital ships into a deadly crossfire. It's risky, but it's our best shot, he finished. Zix nodded grimly. Very well, we'll do it your way. The trap was set. A small group of human ships made a daring raid, drawing the Zorgarth fleet into position. Just as the enemy closed in for the kill, Ventaxian and human forces sprang from hiding. Missiles and ion beams lanced out, catching the Zorgarth in a devastating barrage. Edward whooped as enemy ships exploded around them. That's how it's done! Press the attack! With the Zorgarth fleet in disarray, Edward and Pixis led the ground assault to retake Ventax Prime's capital. They fought side by side through rubble-strewn streets, human grit matching Ventaxian precision. Pixis marveled as she watched a squad of human marines charge a Zorgarth position, heedless of danger. I've never seen such fearlessness, she said. Edward nodded approvingly as Ventaxian snipers systematically eliminated Zorgarth commanders. And I've never seen such discipline under fire. But as days of brutal urban combat wore on, both sides took heavy losses. Edward knew they needed a game changer. We have to take out their command center, he told Pixis. I've got a plan, but the Ventaxian brass won't like it. Edward's team infiltrated the captured lab complex, fighting their way through waves of Zorgarth defenders. They reached the antimatter warhead's trigger point, just as Zorgarth troops herded in Ventaxian hostages. "Shit," Edward swore. "We can't—" Suddenly, Pixis burst in. "This way!" she shouted to the prisoners in Ventaxian. "Follow me!" As Edward and his team laid down covering fire, Pixis led the hostages to safety. Her quick thinking saved the mission and countless lives. With the complex clear, Edward activated the warhead. The resulting blast vaporized the Zorgarth command center, throwing their forces into chaos. In the aftermath, Edward coordinated a final push. Human and Ventaxian ships hunted down the retreating Zorgarth, ensuring total victory. As the dust settled, Edward found Pixis amid the celebration. She embraced him, all prior judgment forgotten. "I was wrong about humans," she said. "Your people are truly remarkable." Edward grinned. "We make a good team. Now how about we take this fight to the Zorgarth homeworld?" Pixis nodded, a fierce light in her eyes. "Together, there's nothing we can't accomplish." The combined human-Ventaxian fleet pushed through the inky void of uncharted space, a motley armada of sleek Ventaxian cruisers and bulky human battleships. On the bridge of the flagship, Edward Allen stood shoulder to shoulder with Pixis, both gazing at the holographic star map before them. "Argathras," Edward said, pointing to a pulsing red dot. "The heart of the Zorgarth Empire. We take that. We cut off the snake's head." Pixis nodded, her blue skin shimmering under the dim bridge lights. "A formidable target. The Zorgarth will throw everything they have at us." Before Edward could respond, alarms blared. The ship rocked violently, throwing them off balance. "Ambush!" the tactical officer shouted. "Zorgarth ships emerging from the asteroid field." Edward gripped the command console, watching as enemy vessels swarmed from behind rocky debris. Explosions bloomed in the void as isolated Alliance ships fell prey to the sudden assault. "They're picking us apart," Pixis said, her voice tight. "We need to take out their command and control." Edward's eyes narrowed. "Agreed. I'm taking a squad aboard their flagship. We'll sabotage it from within." Minutes later, Edward crouched in the hold of a Ventaxian stealth ship, surrounded by a dozen hardened Marines. The craft slipped silently through the chaotic battlefield, invisible to Zorgarth sensors. With a muffled thump, they latched onto the hull of the massive Zorgarth flagship. Edward activated his powered armor, the sleek exoskeleton humming to life. "Breach charges set. On my mark, now!" The hull erupted inward. Edward and his team poured through the opening, pulse rifles at the ready. They encountered no immediate resistance, moving swiftly through twisting alien corridors. "Engineering's this way," Edward said, consulting his heads-up display. "Let's move." They reached the cavernous engine room undetected. Edward's fingers flew across alien control panels, overriding safeties and rerouting power. Alarms wailed as the ship's main weapons array went dark. "Objective complete," Edward reported, "falling back to—" A hail of energy bolts cut him off. Zorgarth's shock troops poured into the chamber, chitinous armor gleaming. "Contact!" Edward shouted, diving for cover. His squad scattered, returning fire. The air filled with the stench of ozone and burnt flesh as both sides traded shots. Edward's comm crackled. "Edward, this is Pixis. I've hacked into their systems. There's a cargo bay 2 decks up. I can guide you there." "Copy that," Edward replied, lobbing a grenade over his cover. "Lead the way." What followed was a brutal fighting retreat. Edward and his Marines battled through corridor after corridor, Pixis feeding them real-time intel to avoid Zorgarth reinforcements. They reached the cargo bay, battered but alive. A sleek shuttle waited, engines primed. "Go, go, go!" Edward shouted as his team piled in. He jumped into the pilot's seat, fingers dancing across the controls. The shuttle rocketed from the bay amid a storm of enemy fire. Edward jinked and weaved, the pursuing Zorgarth fighters growing larger in the rear-view screen. "Hang on!" he yelled, pushing the engines past their limits. The shuttle plunged into the atmosphere of a nearby planet, the hull glowing cherry red from the friction. With a bone-jarring impact, they crash-landed in a sprawling junkyard of derelict ships. Edward staggered from the wreckage, helping his injured Marines. Pixis's voice came through his calm, tinny but welcome. Edward, are you all right? He allowed himself a grim smile. Still breathing, but we're stuck on some kind of salvage world. Looks like it's crawling with Zorgarth. I see it, Pixis replied. It's a forced labor camp. Those workers, they're slaves. Edward watched as hunched figures shuffled between piles of scrap, Zorgarth overseers cracking energy whips. His lips pursed. Not for long, he said. We're going to liberate this rock, and then we're taking the fight straight to Argathras. The combined human-Ventaxian alliance fleet hung in the inky void above Argathras, a menacing silhouette against the planet's rust-red orb. On the bridge of the flagship, Edward Allen studied the tactical display, his face illuminated by the holographic readouts. All ships in position, the tactical officer reported. Edward nodded to Pixis. Initiate Operation Thunderstrike. Pixis's fingers danced across the control panel. Human stealth bombers away. EMP warheads primed. The view screen showed only empty space, but Edward knew dozens of cutting-edge human bombers were streaking towards the planet, cloaked from Zorgarth sensors. Seconds ticked by in tense silence. Suddenly, the planet's energy shield flickered and died. Edward leaned forward. Now! Ion cannons! Fire at will! Ventaxian cruisers unleashed searing blue beams that lanced through the atmosphere, striking key military installations. Explosions bloomed across the surface as defense domes collapsed. Ground defenses neutralized, Pixis announced. Insertion window open. Edward strapped on his combat gear. That's our cue. Let's move! In the drop bay, Edward joined his mixed team of human and Ventaxian operatives. The bay doors opened, revealing the fiery hellscape below. Remember, Edward shouted over the howling wind, we hit hard, we hit fast, and we don't stop until that command center is dust. Clear? A chorus of affirmatives rang out. Edward grinned. Then let's introduce these bugs to some good old-fashioned human chaos. They leapt into the void, plummeting through smoke-choked skies. Edward's stomach lurched as they hurtled past chunks of debris from destroyed Zorgarth installations. The rocky slopes of a massive volcano loomed below. Chutes deployed, Edward called out. They landed hard on the ashy ground, immediately taking cover behind jagged boulders. Zorgarth Patrol, 3 o'clock, a Ventaxian operative hissed. Edward peeked out. A group of chitinous Zorgarth soldiers marched by, oblivious to the infiltrators. His comm crackled. Edward, I've tapped their network. Pixis's voice came through. There's a lava tube entrance 50 meters northwest. It'll lead you right under their defenses. Copy that, Edward whispered. He signaled the team forward. They crept through the alien landscape, ducking behind steam vents and twisted rock formations. A screech pierced the air. Edward looked up to see a leathery, winged creature circling overhead. Indigenous predator, a Ventaxian warned, drawn by the chaos. They double-timed it to the cave entrance Pixis had identified. The team descended into suffocating darkness, guided only by Pixis's directions through their comms. After what felt like hours of crawling through twisting passages, they emerged into a cavernous chamber filled with pulsing alien tech. Zorgarth drones patrolled on spindly legs. This is it, Edward said. The command nexus, let's shut it down. What followed was a brutal room-by-room assault. Energy bolts crisscrossed the air as Edward's team advanced. Zorgarth cyborg troops poured in, their metal limbs gleaming. Edward! Pixis's voice cut through the chaos. I've hacked their systems, redirecting enemy reinforcements now. Force fields sprang to life, cutting off Zorgarth soldiers mid-charge. Bulkhead doors slammed shut, trapping others. They fought their way to the central chamber. Edward's breath caught as he saw the massive Zorgarth commander. It towered over them, more machine than alien. For the Alliance! Edward roared, charging forward. The behemoth's strikes were devastating but slow. Edward rolled and weaved, searching for a weakness. He spotted exposed power conduits running along the floor. Pixis on my mark, overload those conduits. Edward dove between the commander's legs, drawing its attention. Now! Electricity arced through the air. The cyborg commander convulsed, its systems overloading. With a thunderous crash, it collapsed. Edward wasted no time. He yanked the neural cache from the smoking wreckage. Data secured. Let's blow this place and go home. As they raced out, the mountain shook. Lava burst through cracks in the floor. They barely made it to the extraction point as the entire facility was consumed in a fiery avalanche. Back on the flagship, Edward handed the neural cache to the intelligence officers. He turned to Pixis, both of them battered but alive. "We did it," he said. "The Zorgarth command structure is in chaos. Our main force can begin the invasion." Pixis nodded, her eyes shining. "This is just the beginning, Edward. Together there's no limit to what humans and Ventaxians can achieve." Edward clasped her shoulder. "Whatever comes next, we face it as one." Edward and Pixis stood before the tactical hologram, studying the sprawling hive cities of Argathras. The pulsing red points indicated Zorgarth strongholds, a formidable network of defenses. "Conventional assault would cost us dearly," Edward mused, running a hand through his stubble. "We need to hit them where they least expect it." Pixis cocked her head, her blue skin shimmering under the hologram's glow. "What do you propose?" Edward's eyes lit up. "We go under. Strike from below." Within hours, massive boring vehicles rumbled to life. Edward strapped himself into the lead machine, feeling the vibrations as its drill bit into Argathras's crust. Darkness enveloped them, broken only by status lights and the occasional spark from the drill head. "Breakthrough in 3, 2, 1, the pilot called out. With a sudden lurch, they punched through into a cavernous space. Edward's team poured out, rifles at the ready. They found themselves in a maze of conduits and control panels, the Hive City's life support systems. "Fan out," Edward ordered. "Secure these systems. Remember non-lethal takedowns if possible." They moved swiftly, subduing startled Zorgarth technicians with stun rounds. At a central junction, Edward's fingers flew across alien controls. "Initiating environmental lockdown," he reported. "Venting Atmo in sectors 7 through 12. Alarms blared. Through view screens, they watched Zorgarth civilians stumbling in confusion as their air thinned. Power flickered and died in entire city blocks. "Zorgarth response incoming," a Marine shouted. Energy bolts sizzled past Edward's head. He dove for cover, returning fire. The air filled with the acrid smell of ozone and burnt chitin. "Push forward," Edward yelled. "We need to reach the central nexus." They fought their way through twisting corridors, each room a brutal close-quarters struggle. Edward's ears rang from the constant weapons fire. Suddenly, his comm crackled. "Edward, this is Pixis. Our aerospace strikes are underway. How are you holding up?" "Little busy," Edward grunted, ducking a swipe from a Zorgarth warrior's claws. He brought his rifle butt up, catching the alien under its mandibles. "But we're making progress." They battled room by room, seizing control of pheromone dispensers and command relays. With each captured node, more Zorgarth civilians fell into disoriented panic. Finally, they reached the central chamber. Edward's breath caught as he saw the Zorgarth lords, towering cyborg monstrosities, their eyes glowing with malevolent intelligence. "Pixis now," he shouted into his comm. A piercing electronic whine filled the air. The Zorgarth lords staggered, clutching their heads. "Disruption grenades!" Edward ordered. "Light 'em up!" A barrage of sleek canisters arced through the air. They detonated with a cascade of energy that made Edward's teeth ache. The Zorgarth lords collapsed, twitching. As the last hive fell under Alliance control, Edward found himself face-to-face with the Zorgarth Supreme Intelligence, a pulsing, otherworldly construct that filled an entire chamber. "Your resistance is illogical," it intoned, its voice a symphony of alien harmonics. "You cannot hope to—" Edward cut it off. "Save it. Your empire is finished. These are our terms." "Terms of surrender," Edward declared, his voice firm. The pulsing intelligence fell silent, its alien logic circuits struggling to process the finality of defeat. In the days that followed, Edward found himself thrust into a new role as Alliance Administrator overseeing Argathras. He stood before a sea of faces, human, Ventaxian, and subdued Zorgarth, in the cavernous chamber that once housed the Zorgarth High Command. Cameras broadcast his words across two civilizations. Today, we turn the page on conflict, Edward began, his voice echoing. Argathras will no longer be a symbol of oppression, but a beacon of unity. We will transform this world into the new capital of our alliance, a place where humans and Ventaxians live and work as true partners. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Edward caught sight of Pixis, her blue skin radiant as she nodded in approval. He continued, outlining plans to retrofit the hive cities into cosmopolitan centers. "This is madness," a gruff human voice called out. "We can't trust the bugs." Edward locked eyes with the dissenter. Change is never easy, but it's necessary if we're to forge a lasting peace. Pixis stepped forward, her voice melodic yet forceful. "As Ventaxian ambassador, I fully endorse this vision. This is our chance to build something greater than either of our peoples could achieve alone." Over the next years, Edward watched Argathras transform. He stood atop a half-finished arcology, the wind whipping his hair as he surveyed the sprawling construction. Human engineers argued good-naturedly with Ventaxian architects, their differing approaches yielding structures of breathtaking beauty and efficiency. "Quite a view," Pixis said, joining him on the observation platform. Edward nodded. "It's really happening, but we need your help, Pixis. The first wave of Ventaxian colonists arrive next week. They'll need guidance to adapt." "I've already assembled a team of cultural liaisons," Pixis replied. "We'll make sure both our peoples learn to appreciate each other's strengths." Edward's comm unit chirped. He frowned as he listened to the report. Trouble at the Northern Resource Complex. Anti-integration factions are stirring up unrest among the workers. He spent the next week mediating tense negotiations, bringing human ingenuity and Ventaxian communal values to bear on labor disputes. Slowly, production increased to meet the colony's growing needs. But not everyone embraced the new order. Edward was reviewing security reports when an explosion rocked the administrative center. He raced to the scene, his heart sinking as he saw the carnage. Among the victims were several of Pixis's top aides. He found Pixis kneeling amid the rubble, her blue skin ashen with grief. "I won't let them win," she said, her voice raw. "Edward, let me take the fight to these extremists." Edward hesitated, then nodded. "Be careful. I'll feed you what intel I can, but your cover has to be airtight." Days later, he watched from a hidden camera as Pixis, disguised in drab worker's garb, made contact with a known sympathizer of the resistance. His hands clenched as she disappeared into the shadowy underworld of Argathras, carrying the hopes of their fledgling alliance with her. Pixis vanished into the shadowy underworld of Argathras, her blue skin hidden beneath layers of grime and worker's garb. For weeks, she navigated the treacherous waters of the anti-alliance terrorist network, carefully building trust with the militant cell leaders. In the depths of abandoned hive tunnels, Pixis endured grueling indoctrination sessions. She forced herself to spew vitriol against human Ventaxian integration, all while secretly relaying crucial intelligence to Edward. "Another bombing thwarted in Sector 7, Edward muttered, studying the tactical display. "Pixis's intel is saving lives." But the constant dance on the knife's edge took its toll. During a tense meeting in a dimly lit safe house, a scarred Zorgarth extremist leaned in close, mandibles twitching. "You've been awful quiet lately, Blue," he hissed. "Makes a bug wonder where your loyalties lie." Pixis felt her heart's race but kept her face impassive. "My loyalty is to our cause, nothing more." The next day she found herself strapped to a chair, wires running from her temples to a crude lie detector. A human terrorist, his face twisted with hate, barked questions. "Do you support the mixing of our species?" Pixis dug deep, channeling every ounce of revulsion she could muster. "It sickens me," she spat. The machine hummed. Pixis held her breath. "She's clean," the human grunted, clearly disappointed. But the cell leaders weren't satisfied. In a smoke-filled room, they laid out their final test. "Kill a human official," the Zorgarth leader chittered. "Prove your worth." Pixis felt the weight of her cover identity crushing down. She nodded grimly, knowing refusal meant certain death. Meanwhile, in the gleaming Alliance Command Center, Edward received an encrypted message. His blood ran cold as he read the warning from an unknown Ventaxian ally within the terrorist ranks. "Pixis is in danger," he breathed. "We need to extract her." But as his intelligence teams scrambled to uncover the assassination target, Edward realized the gravity of the situation. Pulling Pixis out now could unravel months of work and cost countless lives. Days of frantic investigation led to a chilling discovery. The target was none other than General Marcus Tron, Edward's mentor, and a cornerstone of the human Ventaxian alliance. Edward paced the command center, mind racing. "We can't let this happen, but we can't blow Pixis's cover either." He formulated a daring plan, praying it would work. On the day of the ceremony, Pixis crouched on a maintenance catwalk high above the gathered dignitaries. Her hands trembled as she assembled the sniper rifle, its toxin-laced ammunition designed for a clean kill. Through her scope, she watched as General Tron took the podium. Unbeknownst to her, Edward had orchestrated a last-minute switch, replacing Tron with a body double. Pixis steadied her breathing, lining up the shot. Her finger tightened on the trigger. The crack of the rifle echoed across the plaza. The body double crumpled, a perfect hit to the chest. Chaos erupted. Screams filled the air as the crowd scattered. In the confusion, Edward's extraction team moved in. Pixis abandoned her rifle, heart pounding as she raced through maintenance tunnels. She could hear the shouts of her terrorist handlers closing in. "Traitor!" a voice bellowed behind her. She sprinted through twisting corridors, lungs burning. A plasma bolt sizzled past her head, scorching the wall. Pixis skidded around a corner, finding herself in a dead end. She whirled, facing her pursuers with nowhere left to run. The scarred Zorgarth raised his weapon, mandibles spread in a victorious snarl. Suddenly, the far wall exploded inward. Through the smoke strode General Tron himself, leading a team of Alliance commandos. "Stand down!" Tron roared, his voice carrying the full weight of command. In the aftermath, Pixis knelt before Tron, her eyes brimming with tears. "General, I'm so sorry. I never wanted—" Tron placed a hand on her shoulder, silencing her. "There's nothing to forgive, Pixis. Edward told me everything. Your sacrifice has saved countless lives." Pixis looked up, seeing not condemnation in Tron's eyes, but understanding. She realized then that her ordeal was finally over, and the true work of healing the rift between their peoples could. Pixis jolted awake, sweat beading on her blue skin. The sterile white walls of the Alliance medical facility seemed to close in around her. She blinked rapidly, trying to banish the lingering images of screaming civilians and burning buildings from her mind. A human nurse approached, datapad in hand. "How are you feeling today, Ambassador?" Pixis opened her mouth to respond, but suddenly the nurse's face morphed into that of a snarling Zorgarth terrorist. With a strangled cry, Pixis lashed out, her fist connecting with the nurse's jaw. The woman stumbled backward, shock and pain etched across her features. "I'm so sorry," Pixis gasped, horror dawning as reality reasserted itself. "I didn't mean to. I thought you were—" Security rushed in, restraining Pixis as she trembled uncontrollably. The incident cemented her fears. She was a danger, unstable, unfit for the delicate work of forging a lasting peace. Later that day, Edward found Pixis packing her meager belongings. "What are you doing?" he asked, worry creasing his brow. "I'm leaving, Edward," Pixis said quietly. "I've submitted a formal request for extended repatriation to Ventax Prime." Edward stepped closer, his voice low and urgent. "Pixis, you can't. We need you here. This is just a setback." "A setback?" Pixis whirled on him, anger flaring. I attacked an innocent woman. I see enemies everywhere I look. I'm compromised, Edward. Can't you see that? It's the trauma talking, Edward pleaded. Give it time. We have therapists, specialists. Humans, Pixis spat. Who can't possibly understand what I've been through, what I've seen? She softened slightly at the hurt in Edward's eyes. I need to be among my own people to heal. Edward's shoulders sagged. I understand, but promise me you'll come back when you're ready. The Alliance needs you. I need you. Pixis turned away, unable to meet his gaze. Don't make promises you can't keep, Edward. Maybe it's time we face the truth. Humans and Ventaxians, we're too different. This dream of perfect coexistence, it's naive, arrogant even. You don't mean that, Edward said, his voice barely above a whisper. Don't I? Pixis challenged. Look around you. We defeated the Zorgarths only to find ourselves locked in an endless struggle of conflicting ideologies. There are no winners here, Edward, only more victims. The shuttle bay was cold and impersonal as Pixis boarded the transport that would take her home. She paused at the threshold, turning back for one last look at Edward. Their eyes met across the expanse, a universe of unspoken words passing between them. Then the hatch sealed shut, severing their connection. Months passed in a haze of therapy sessions and metaphysical treatments on Ventax Prime. Pixis found herself adrift, haunted by the horrors she'd witnessed and an insidious voice that whispered of her own inadequacy. She no longer felt at home among her own people, their concerns seeming trivial after the crucible of war. Just as despair threatened to overwhelm her, a priority message flashed on her comm unit. Edward's face appeared, grim and urgent. Pixis, I know you're still recovering, but we need you. Alliance intelligence has uncovered something terrifying. The Zorgarths, they're regrouping beyond our borders, and they're not alone. Pixis listened in growing horror as Edward outlined the threat. A bioweapon. Extremists from both sides working together. The very foundations of peace teetering on the brink of annihilation. You're the only one who can decrypt this intelligence, Edward finished. We need you back on Argathrace, now. Pixis's hand hovered over the comm unit, indecision warring within her. Could she trust herself? Was she ready to plunge back into the fray? The faces of those she'd fought alongside flashed through her mind, human and Ventaxian alike, united in a common cause. With a deep breath, she made her choice. I'm on my way. Days later, Pixis crouched in the shadows of a cavernous alien structure, her strike team fanned out behind her. They'd tracked the extremists to this remote outpost, racing against time to stop the bioweapons deployment. As they crept deeper into the facility, Pixis' blood ran cold. Familiar human faces mingled with Zorgarth warriors, working side by side with a terrifying singularity of purpose. How had it come to this? A muffled scream echoed from a nearby chamber. Pixis signaled her team to hold position as she edged forward, peering through a viewing port. Her hearts nearly stopped. Edward lay strapped to a nightmarish apparatus, his body convulsing as strange energies pulsed through him. A Zorgarth scientist loomed over him, mandibles clicking in satisfaction. The indoctrination is nearly complete, the alien rasped. Soon, he will be the instrument of Argathrace's destruction. Poetic, is it not? Pixis stumbled back, legs shaking. The fate of two worlds now rested in her hands. Could she save Edward, or would she be forced to stop him, by any means necessary?
You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.